This week, you could finally take a sigh of relief because Mercury is stationing direct after the most tumultuous Mercury retrograde of this year. But by the end of the week, some old skeletons, some old things come back up from the past that we have to deal with for the next 2 months. So let's go ahead and get started talking about it. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White, and this time we're talking about August 26th through September 1st of 2024. This week is not the most impactful week. However, we do see a vibe shift leaving August and all of the craziness that we had to a relatively chill time. And I think it's going to be exciting that Mercury stations direct. However, by the end of this week, Pluto moves back into Capricorn, and we get 2 more months of Pluto in Capricorn before Pluto is permanently in Aquarius, or at least it'll be in Aquarius for the next 20 years. So let's go ahead and jump in. Also, by the way, I have some really, really big stuff coming up later on this week. So if you haven't already, I want you to subscribe to my newsletter over on my website if you want to stay up to date with what's going on. You guys will be aware of it, but I would really recommend signing up for the newsletter if you want to be one of the first people to grab onto this opportunity. So big stuff coming up. Really excited to announce it, and I'll be letting you guys know what that looks like as we move forward throughout time. So we start Monday off with the moon just being in Gemini, and it's really just going to be making a square to the sun now that the sun is in Virgo. So the big thing with this is I don't talk too much about the moon making aspects to the sun, unless of course it's like a new moon or a full moon. But what I find really interesting about this is that the moon's in Gemini, right? Mars is still in Gemini. Jupiter's still in Gemini. There's still a lot of information that we're going to be getting on Monday. I think with the moon in Gemini squaring the sun in Virgo, though, is that there's this kind of a moment of like, what information is critical to actually understanding versus what information is useless. There's so much mutable energy going on right now where it's kind of hard to tell what moving forward looks like. Everything is in change. Everything is in flux at this time. And so with the moon in Gemini, we're a lot more communicative. We're getting a lot more information. We're sharing with other people. But the sun in Virgo is like really looking for specifics. And I just feel like there's this moment on Monday where it's like, all right, I have all this information. What is actually useful and what is actually useless? So then we jump into Tuesday, and the big highlight that we have going on Tuesday is first, Venus, while it's still in Virgo, is going to make a trine to Uranus. We're then going to have the moon still in Gemini first make a square to Saturn, then it's going to conjoin Jupiter. Then the moon will sextile Mercury right before Mercury is stationing direct. Mercury is still retrograde at this moment. The moon will sextile Mercury and then conjoin Mars, and then the moon is going to square Venus. So there's a lot of lunar transits going on Tuesday, but the first highlight that we have is Venus making a trine to Uranus. And this is a nice little touch. Venus trining Uranus is just kind of like a little breakthrough, spontaneous fun. Venus is in Virgo, where I always like look at Virgo as like tinkering with things and kind of like, all right, well, what if I just did this little tiny thing and this little tiny thing? And I've made this analogy before. Sometimes Venus in Virgo is like if you pluck your eyebrows, you could just go too far with it. So you don't want to tinker too much to make things bad. But the idea here is Venus in Virgo, she's not all that comfortable there. She doesn't have access to the resources or tools that she needs to like really do her job, which is have fun, create, good relationships, all of that stuff. But as she trines Uranus, there is some sort of like innovative way of doing things. There is some sort of a breakthrough opportunity. There is some sort of like spontaneous fun and maybe in an area that you weren't necessarily expecting. However, why this is, I think, a little bit different is the moon's just making so many transits on Tuesday that there's a lot of things kind of happening that I feel like it's going to kind of mute or dull out the Venus-Uranus trine. So the moon is first going to make a square to Saturn, and then it's going to conjoin Jupiter, where this just seems like a lot of tough decisions being made. The moon in Gemini squaring Saturn in Pisces is like, you have all of this information and you have all of this data, but you can't move forward. It's like you still don't know something. Like, you feel like you have all the facts on paper, but there's still something missing, and it's like it's impeding you from moving forward. And the moon conjoining Jupiter afterwards is like, hey, because again, the moon squaring Saturn is always rough, especially when you want to have things move forward. You want to have all the information. The moon squaring Saturn is like, I have all this information, but nothing actually feels right. Nothing actually feels correct. That moon conjoining Jupiter is at least giving you an opportunity to see it in a different way, to see a bigger picture. One of the things I really want to do is I want to make a video about a box, and I want to take this box and I want to open it up for you guys to show that you are now allowed to think outside of the box. And I really look at the moon conjoining Jupiter with Jupiter in detriment is an opportunity to think outside of the box. What I like about Jupiter in detriment is that you can't just be like hopeful and whimsical and faithful in a really easy way. There's a little bit of a complication to it. But I think there's a lot more reward when you do force yourself to be a lot more hopeful, and we have to kind of like, make things and bend things in our mind in order to like open our minds up to things. And so I think the moon making that square to Saturn is like, like I just don't have all the information. I just feel like I'm overwhelmed with stuff and I don't know what the right thing is to move forward. But then as the moon conjoins Jupiter, it's like, okay, like how can we be hopeful about this? How can we really see the bigger picture? How can we just let go of the situation and let things play out? And again, lean into luck. Like that's something I really like about Jupiter is it's okay to trust luck. Like in a lot of things in life, you have to get lucky. And if you don't believe that you are lucky, well, you're not going to get lucky. But if you do believe you're going to get lucky, there's a much higher chance you're actually going to see that luck and experience that. So then the moon, after it conjoins Jupiter, is then going to make a sextile to Mercury, which what's nice about this is after the moon conjoins Jupiter, and again, we're kind of seeing the bigger picture, we're kind of opening up our minds, the moon makes a little sextile to Mercury. Mercury is retrograde. The whole point of a Mercury retrograde is to, again, revise things, see things through a different perspective where it's like, okay, here is how I can kind of maybe change the situation. Here is how I can pragmatically put things together that, you know, while it might not be, you know, intuitive or it may not actually make a lot of rational sense, I can contort or manipulate the situation to make it work out for me. The moon, though, will conjoin Mars right after that sextile to Mercury. The implementation, again, the hard part about Jupiter is that it's the whole point of Jupiter is to trust the situation, right? See the bigger picture, trust, open up your heart, just know that everything's going to be taken care of you or taken care of for you. But then the moon conjoins Mars, and it's so much harder to actually apply that. Like it's easy to be like, just trust the universe and just trust yourself. But then when you're actually in a situation where you have to trust, that's hard. And I think the moon conjoining Mars does bring up that frustration. Like we just want to use all the information that we have. And Mars and Gemini is like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going here. I'm going there. And there's just going to be kind of this overwhelming, frustrating feeling. And so after that, the moon is then going to make a square to Venus. And it's just kind of like, again, it's everything. Shit's hard to do. Okay. Like what I really enjoy about personal development or spiritual growth is there's a lot of upside and a lot of positive, but to get through that, you actually have to do quite a bit of work. And it's all very internal. It reminds me of going through like a stress factor, or like once you've been through something really, really difficult in life, like in that moment, it really sucks. It really, really sucks. But then when you're on the other side of it, you could see all the benefits and you're glad that you went through it in the way that you did and you didn't lose that hope. On Tuesday, there's like that knowing about the other side, but there's a struggle in dealing with the present moment. And the moon just in Gemini squaring Venus and Virgo, it also reminds me of, I'm starting to get old where I don't like being at clubs where I can't hear the people that I'm with and the music's too loud. The moon in Gemini is like, it's too loud. You're shaking your fist at the cloud. There's just something about being uncomfortable on late Tuesday evening. But the good news is that will eventually leave once we get to Wednesday. So then we get to Wednesday, and on Wednesday, the moon is going to ingress into Cancer. Venus is going to go to opposite Neptune as our first highlight, and our second highlight is Mercury finally stations direct. Okay, I really think Wednesday is like, it's kind of like plopping on your couch after kind of a long whirlwind day, like you're doing a Costco run, you got to do all these errands, and then you finally have a moment to like just sit down and relax. That's what Wednesday feels like to me. As the moon ingresses into Cancer, you're going to want to have a little bit more of a focus on care, on comfort, on, again, just kind of relaxing. It's like, have you ever gotten home from like, again, like a Costco trip or a big shopping day and you just kind of throw everything before you put everything away? You just need to like sit down and like recalibrate yourself. That's what this reminds me of. But we do have Venus going opposite Neptune. And what I do like about this is that there's a lot of opportunity to tap into like fantasy, tap into a bigger picture here. Like, the difference between Jupiter and Neptune is Jupiter is more off works a little bit more off faith. Jupiter works a little bit more off of like, again, the universe and trust. Neptune is more of like distorting an image. Neptune is more of like, okay, how can I actually visualize something? How can I, again, create that? And Neptune and Jupiter do have a lot of similarities. However, Neptune, I would argue people are going to argue with me that Neptune is super spiritual, which I can agree with. But the big issue with astrology is a lot of people associate everything to everything. Like, for example, the Mercury rules communication, the third house rules communication, the moon can rule communication, the sun can rule communication. And so what astrologers, and when I say astrologers, I mean both professional and amateur astrologers or people that are into it, we really suck at actually clarifying what these things actually look like. And that's what's really frustrating about me being like, I don't really think Neptune's all that spiritual. People are like, oh my God, Cameron, no, Neptune is. It's like, that's the fucking point of Jupiter. Jupiter is your religion. Like, we already have that one. So while there can be balances with things, there can be blending of energies. I think Neptune is more of a distortion. Neptune is more of a, again, like a solution. Neptune doesn't necessarily represent the core value of like what spirituality is, which is, again, like belief. It is more of like a religion. It is more of a faith that is going to be more Jupiter. Neptune, on the other hand, is going to be more of like an idealism, more of a romanticism. There's more of a, again, it can involve things like spirituality, but I don't think that's the core essence of it. But what I'm trying to get to is, with Venus going opposite Neptune, there can be this tapping into fantasy, right? It's a Venus-Neptune connection. Issue here is that it's an opposition. So Venus in Virgo, where she's uncomfortable and she's like, Venus is trying to have fun and she's kind of struggling with it because she's trying to like pinpoint everything together. It's opposite Neptune, where it's like, hey, sometimes you just have to let things work out. Sometimes you have to just like let go of that control over the situation. And there is this kind of confusion on what you want, because Venus in Virgo is like, again, so specific and so picky, and it goes opposite Neptune, where it's like, all right, well, I just did all of this to try to have fun, and I don't even know what I want anymore. So there's going to be kind of this feeling of like, I don't even know what I want, I don't even know what I enjoy, and just kind of a bigger fog of confusion going on with Venus going opposite Neptune. Luckily, it goes away really quickly, but the good news is Mercury stations direct on Wednesday. When Mercury stations direct, it's just, again, we still have to go over all of the same area that Mercury just retrograded in. So we have the third and final time of dealing with the situation. But now we know what the problems are. Like, the bullshit is kind of done. The, oh, this is going wrong, or I didn't expect this. We have a lot more clarity on how to go about this same situation. For most of my, I shouldn't say most, for a good group of guys and a good group of girls that are in my audience, it's like working on your car. You get to go to one AutoZone trip. You think you got to handle the first AutoZone trip. It's not until that fifth or sixth AutoZone trip where you're really figuring out, like, okay, this is what's wrong with the car. This is what I got to get. If you've ever worked on your car before, it's like it's a whole day just going back and forth to AutoZone, getting some stupid random part. That's like Mercury being direct is like, okay, we now know exactly what the issue is. We know what part we have to get. This should, as long as we have the right tools, should be the last trip to AutoZone. So we still have to go back. Now we know like what the situation actually looks like. So like the diagnosis part is over, and now it's more of like we can actually fix the situation. So what is a little bit frustrating about Mercury stationing direct is that it's still slow. Like, Mercury's not like, oh, we're done, we can start moving fast, everything's gonna, quickly just be handled. It's just like, all right, now we know what to move forward to. For example, like one of the last times I had to do some major work on my car, I had this 2001 Ford Explorer, and it went from like something with the timing belt to something with like the fourth and the fifth cylinder. Then we had to replace all of the valves, and it was just one thing after another. And it was like, by the time I can't remember exactly what we did, but I remember by the time we knew what the problem was, it was like the solution is going to take a while. It's like, this isn't like a 20-minute job. This is like a 6-hour job, and that's like Mercury stationing direct. It's like, all right, we know what the problem is, but fixing all that stuff is still going to get slow. It's still going to be a little bit, not as quick to get to, and that's okay. Just, again, understanding patience, I think, is really important during this time. Then we get to Thursday. I'm really, really looking to Thursday. The moon is going to be making a trine to Saturn, and we have another highlight this week, which is Venus is going to ingress into Libra and make a trine to Pluto. The trine to Pluto, I kind of almost don't even care about, to be honest with you guys, but Venus going into Libra, we finally have a planet back in its own domicile. For example, Jupiter's in detriment right now. Saturn is not really, dignified much in Pisces. Mars isn't really dignified in Gemini. Mercury's not really dignified in Leo. The sun's not really dignified in Virgo. But we'll finally have a planet in some sort of dignity. So what's exciting about that is just kind of like right now with everything, when it comes to a dignity scheme, essentially, like the issue is really going to be like not everything has the tools or the resources that it needs. So it kind of has to wing some stuff or borrow some stuff. When a planet goes into its home sign and it has some dignity, it's like it's natural, it's easy. There isn't like a borrowing or a lending or a working with other people's resources. It's just natural and flow. And what's nice is that this is Venus. This is pleasure and fun and connection and desire. Really enjoyable. However, we will have the moon in Cancer making a trine to Saturn. Moon in Cancer trining Saturn is really just like focusing on necessities, focusing on priorities, like being like, all right, this is what I absolutely have to take care of. Let me just get it done. It's not that big of a deal. Now, what I do like about Venus going into Libra, though, is that there is a bigger focus on pleasure and fun and love, and it just becoming easier. Now, again, what's more important is understanding what house Libra rules in your chart, because this house is just going to become a lot easier, a lot nicer. And again, who doesn't love things being nicer and easier? Now, Venus trining Pluto is like powerful connections. The hard part is like, okay, if Pluto is like the underground. Pluto is what's hidden, pretty much hidden forces and things like that. It is transformation. It is kind of like, again, power dynamics. Venus trining Pluto is like good, powerful dynamics. Now, that could be against you, or it could be for you. It really, again, depends on your layout of the chart. But Venus trining Pluto is like, okay, things get like really good in one area of your life, and there's like some sort of power connection here that is really nice. Your job as someone who watches, horoscopes or studies astrology is just understanding how this affects your chart. I'd be really curious, like in the comments below, like let me know how you think this is going to look. But Venus trining Pluto, powerful connections, powerful fun, great. So then we get to Friday, and the moon is going to still be in Cancer. It's going to make a it's going to make a sextile to Uranus. It's then going to trine Neptune. Then the moon ingresses into Leo, and then we'll go opposite Pluto, and then it's going to sextile Venus. A lot of lunar transits going on here on Friday. What I like about the moon in Cancer sextiling Uranus is trying new things, being creative. Again, I've talked a lot about the moon in Cancer with Uranus and Taurus. It reminds me of like during the lockdowns where people were like, I'm going to start making sourdough bread, or I'm going to build my own garden. Like the moon in Cancer sextiling Uranus and Taurus is so like, I'm just going to try, like there's something about fermentation and bread and specifically sourdough that's very moon in Cancer. And again, sextiling Uranus and Taurus, it's like, oh, I want to try new foods, and there's like this whole health kick, and there's a whole revolution going on with food right now that I feel like not a lot of people are talking about with Uranus and Taurus. Like that is both the whole trend in keto carnivore and the whole like agricultural stuff, permaculture stuff, regenerative agriculture stuff, along with even the whole vegan food stuff. Now there's impossible meat, and there's all these like, again, there's lab grown meat. Uranus and Taurus is really like shooken up the food world, in my opinion. And just the moon sextiling, Uranus and Taurus just always just reminds me of, again, like try making that sourdough, or try doing something. I'm going to start making cold brew because I'm tired of spending, however much ridiculous money I spend on coffee. So I was going to start making my own, cold brew. But the moon then trines Neptune. And what I like about the moon sextiling Uranus and then trining Neptune is like, for example, like you make your first sourdough and you're like, this is the best. I'm gonna become a baker, and I'm gonna open my own bakery shop. And you're like, when you do something for the first time and you just get really excited about it and you start like idealizing and romanticizing everything, like that's the Neptune stuff. So like the moon trining Neptune is like you make your own sourdough, and now you're like, I'm a baker, and I can make bread, and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that. Realistically, you probably won't. Like you might just make sourdough a couple more times before you give it up and just keep buying it again. But that's kind of the moon trining Neptune, is like really romanticizing and idealizing the situation that you just created, which is fine. Have fun with it. But it's just kind of like, just know that, there's a slight possibility it may not actually last all that long. But then the moon goes into Leo. And again, it's kind of like, you pat yourself on the back. I just made my own sourdough bread. I can kind of do anything. I'm going to make bread. It's really funny. I'm talking really fast right now, but my parents did this. My mom and my stepdad, they make sourdough. I mean, they're literally their own bakery. They give sourdough to like their a 5-mile radius around them. They're all getting sourdough. Like they just make bread and make bread and make bread. So I just think that's a funny analogy. But the moon goes into Leo. There's a little bit of a pompous attitude. There's a little bit of, again, patting yourself on the back, which in my opinion isn't that bad. Like you're just talking to a Leo sun. So I'm always going to be like, yeah, you should feel good. You should feel confident. You shouldn't feel shame. But the moon is then going to go opposite Pluto, where again, we live in a culture that does shame a lot. Now, we're not like an Eastern culture where like shame is this really powerful social tool. But even when it comes to our own problems or even our own pride, like again, if you have a different opinion, or if you're, interested in something that might be a little bit, I don't know, like again, hard, like other people just don't understand. For example, astrology. And you want to share about it, but there's this shame around, being into astrology, like, oh, that's not scientific, blah, blah, blah. The moon going opposite Pluto is just like, why, again, I can't emphasize this enough. Our relationship to society and people is going to absolutely be revolutionized over this next 20 years. And it's small increments. It's not like all of a sudden, I mean, again, there are going to be events that kind of all of a sudden change things. Just like when Pluto moved into Capricorn, we saw that whole revolution. Again, we saw the banking collapse and how we just bailed out the banks. And that kind of changed how money works and all the other stuff. But the moon going into Leo, going opposite Pluto in Aquarius, is really kind of like, what is your relationship to what your own desires are, what your authenticity is, versus how do you let other people's opinions control and shape and dictate you? And the reason I'm emphasizing this so much is I have my sun at 0 degrees Leo. I've had Pluto going back and forth over my sun. And it's a little hard. I'm not going to lie. It's not the worst transit in my opinion, but there is a level of like, I've felt so much better just not being afraid to be exactly who I want to be, and like, whether that's my beliefs or how I act, and not letting other people's reaction to that influence me. There's a difference between kind of being like running around naked outside, in a downtown area and people kind of shaming you because that's, there's boundaries to this kind of stuff. But it's one of those things where I'm not going to do something that I genuinely like want to do, or something that makes me feel better about myself, that makes me more authentic, just because other people don't like it. Because to be honest with you, no one's going to be there at my funeral except my loved ones. No one's going to give a shit about me at the end of the day. Why are you letting other people's opinions affect everything? They don't give a fuck about you. You think they do, and they say that they do, but then in reality, they don't. And I just can't emphasize enough, like, this is the powerful part about astrology. Like, I always hate how, in Western culture, we have this really strong individual sense of self, right? And if you get into like the fourth turning and the generations and stuff like that, there's kind of like a cyclical matter about that. However, because of that, in the astrology world, a lot of astrology is extremely, extremely left, and they kind of like really antagonize the idea of like individualism. And it's like, your birth chart is the most individual thing you could ever possibly have. It is the thing that like gives us a map about how of a unique individual you are. You are not like anybody else. You are only you. And there's so much power in knowing that. And there's so much awareness in knowing, again, what the hell your problems are, your life circumstances that you didn't control. But again, how you can get out of those, how you can make life work for you, where you can find good luck. That's the beauty about a birth chart. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is like, you are an individual. There is no one else like you on earth, and there will never be anyone like you. So you should, again, like, God gave you so much to work with. And I just feel like it's an act of resistance to God. And I don't even give a shit if you believe in God or not, but like the universe or whatever placeholder you want to use, it is such an act of rebellion in a way that is just disgusting to not, lean into the authentic parts of yourself that your soul and your heart have given you. Like, quit trying to conform to everybody. Be your fucking self. Be an individual. Have your own thoughts. Literally open up the box and think outside of it. And I know I'm ranting here, but when I talk about that moon in Leo opposite Pluto, like, these are small little, again, just small chisels. Like, if you're building a marble sculpture, it's not that episode of SpongeBob where you just like hit the chisel and there's perfect sculpture. You got to do these little tiny marks, and these little tiny marks matter. And I don't want you guys to be afraid of being individuals and having your own, again, beliefs, your own identities, your own experience. Just be authentic and stop trying to conform yourself to what everybody else expects of you. Because guess what? They don't give a shit about you. You're going to die alone anyway. All that really matters is how you feel about your own life. So as we continue, the moon is then going to sextile Venus after that opposition to Pluto. There's nothing more charming and there's nothing more sexy than someone who is their own self, that doesn't let, again, the world kind of control or dictate what they do. They don't live in this conformist little bubble. And I'm bringing this up because the moon in Leo sextiling Venus in Libra is hot. That's sexy. That's fun. And there's something about like overcoming fear and just having a lot more fun with things, especially too when you're just like not afraid. Like, don't be afraid. Again, fear is the ultimate devil. And the reason I'm also maybe speaking about this too is, the next 8 years looks tumultuous in the astrology, right? And it's easy to like live in that fear about it and to worry. But the reality is worrying doesn't do anything. And so, I mean, my whole job is to understand what the future looks like and do. And the more I get into it, it's kind of like this bell curve where I'm like, I'm not afraid of it. Then I'm like, oh my God, I'm learning all this stuff. I'm all afraid. But now I'm at the end of this bell curve where I'm just like, what is there to be afraid about? Because even like, let's say there's a nuclear blast and we all die. Okay, great. Then it's over. It's as simple as that. I just get evaporated. I don't even feel anything. How great is that to not suffer in death? So I just look at it as the more you can live life without being afraid, like the more opportunities come, the more that you can just naturally express yourself. And I think with the moon going opposite Pluto, there's an opportunity to just address that in a little tiny chisel that again adds up over time. And then that moon sextiling Venus is like, hey, don't be afraid. Like, what is, for example, let's say you're a guy at a bar and you're trying to hit on a girl. What in your life right now is that girl that's out of your league that you're afraid to hit on? What is that in your life? Is that a job? Is that, a certain income? Like, what is that? What is something that you want to flirt with so bad and that you want to get it, but you have this fear over it? And it's a sextile. It's like, it doesn't have to be this like confrontation, like, come here, woman, like, I'm going to talk to you. It's not like that. It's charming. It's just kind of easy. Like a sextile is so like, hey, we're just next to each other. Let's spark up a convo. So don't be afraid to go after those things. And then we get to Saturday, and the moon is going to be applying to a sextile with Jupiter the whole day. The sextile doesn't actually happen until Sunday, but what I love about that is on Saturday, the moon is leaving that sextile with Venus, right? A little fun, little sexy, and it's just applying to Jupiter all day long. So there's this kind of like hope is on its way. We're seeing the bigger picture as time goes on. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to have this instantaneous moment, but the moon just applying to Jupiter all day is like, there's something about Saturday that's really enriching. And then we get to Sunday, and on Sunday, the moon is then going to actually make that sextile to Jupiter. It's then going to conjoin Mercury. Then the moon squares Uranus. Then it sextiles Mars. Then we have the highlight, and Pluto goes back into Capricorn. And then the moon goes into Virgo, and we begin the new moon phase, which is something that we're going to talk about next week. But a lot of lunar stuff going on Sunday. So the moon sextiling Jupiter is, again, solution to things, making things actually happen, especially as moon conjoins Mercury. So with the moon in Leo sextiling Jupiter, it's like, again, when you have confidence, when you feel like yourself, it's just easy to start making things happen. When you're like, oh, woe is me, I can't do anything. And then you're presented with a problem. You're like, I don't know what the solution is. I'm dumb, which is so dumb to think about. But when you're like full of yourself, and again, there's a difference between being egotistical and narcissistic versus like just being confident and being integral. And the moon in Leo sextiling Jupiter is like, hey, if you're feeling good, you're feeling confident. The moon sextiling Jupiter is like, oh, here's a solution right here. Oh, here's this. And then, because if you're not feeling confident and the moon in Leo is like really shameful for you, the moon sextiling Jupiter is like, there's so many options. There's so many things we could do. I don't know what to do. I don't want you guys to feel that way. So the moon sextiling Jupiter, a lot of different ways to figure things out. The moon conjoins Mercury is like, you know what? Boom. Here's the solution. We're going to handle it right here, right now. Say it loud and proud. That's exciting. The moon is then going to square Uranus. So again, you can always plan for things, but they don't always necessarily go according to plan. You have to have contingencies. And so the moon squaring Uranus is going to be some sort of a disruption. And again, maybe you're just feeling so good and high and proud that you're just like, you know what? Let's just disrupt this whole thing. Let's just shake it all up. Or you might be feeling shameful, and that moon squaring Uranus is that little bit of shame. Again, when you're on stage and you're not feeling yourself, like the audience can see it and they're going to start booing you and throwing tomatoes at you. Which one do you want to be? Do you want to just kind of shake it up and improv, or do you want everyone to throw tomatoes at you? So the moon squares Uranus, there's a disruption there. But what is nice is the moon in Leo then sextiles Mars in Gemini, where it kind of reminds me of a good stand-up comedian can handle hecklers in the crowd and just kind of be like, oh, fuck you. Like, just say something real sharp and quick. That's the energy to have on Sunday. Like, you're going to get a disruption, and are you going to be like, oh, like, again, paralyzed in fear? Or are you going to, like, say something quick and witty back that, like, gets to the, like, again, just think of a stand-up comedian dealing with a heckler. They just know how to, like, target the problem and just know how to say something funny that overcomes the whole solution. That's the vibe you want to have on Sunday. Okay. Pluto's retrograde, and it's going to go back into Capricorn. Whew. Okay. This almost has nothing to do with you. On a bigger picture, it's really interesting how we go into this election with Pluto back in Capricorn. Really interesting how it's bringing up themes around between 2008 and 2020. I would argue it brings up a lot between 2020 and 2022. So there's kind of a lot to talk about there in the grand geopolitical scheme of things. But on a personal level, this is what I want to talk about. I talked about this on my Patreon. There's a bunch of asterisks next to Patreon because that's all changing very soon. So like I said, I'm telling you about the update. Pluto's going to go back into Capricorn. You have one more opportunity to take whatever house Capricorn rules for you and transform that. If Pluto is transformations, it is power and fear and corruption, but it's really like uprooting all of this like really crazy, nasty stuff. What house does Capricorn rule in your chart? And what was your relationship with that since 2008? And I'm asking you guys for that's a big question to ask, right? It's a lot of time to think about. But how has that area of your life changed over the past, 15, 17 years or something like that? You have one more opportunity to make that wrong right, to right those wrongs. You have one more opportunity to look at that area, because Pluto's going to go back into Capricorn no matter what. Do you want to have some fear in this area? Or do you want to say, you know what? I want to close this chapter the right way. I want to take this opportunity to completely change my narrative around this area. Because that's what you've got over these next 2 months. Change it. Right those wrongs. If you don't like how Pluto treated you over the past few years in that area, you've got 2-month opportunity to transform that. You really do. I think that's the most important part about Pluto just going back into Capricorn. Then the moon goes into Leo and we begin that new moon. Lots of low energy here. The moon is really dark, but it's like low energy in terms of like not a lot going on, but it's all in Virgo. Time to get organized. Now that Mercury's direct, it's like, what are we moving forward to? Let's get our tools organized. Let's get our plan of action organized. Let's get those lights set up for the hood of the, car to be able to see what we're working on, be able to lay out everything so we're ready to go for next week. Next week, we have the new moon in Virgo. Really exciting. We have Mars squaring Neptune. This is probably the easiest way to say that. We have Venus conjoining the South Node. Not the worst in my opinion. Mars goes into Cancer. If you got my email, if you were on my newsletter, I just wrote a big ass thing about Mars and Cancer. That's going to be fun. It's going to be good, but it's not going to be the most fun. Mercury's going to make another square to Uranus. Again, we'll see that one coming from a mile away. And then the sun goes opposite Saturn. Lots of stuff to go on next week. And really this week is kind of like the lower energy and next week is really the vibe shift. Going away from the craziness of August. And next week really introduces what honestly the next 6 months to 8 months look like. So with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys. Let me know what's going on for you guys in your lives in the comments below. And I'll be seeing you next time.